Welcome, dear students. I'd like to make a presentation of a new lecture which is devoted to the international production. International production is driven by the TNCs, transnational corporations, and they are the driving force of globalization. In this lecture we're going to study multinational corporations, their functions, their basic structure, what they do and how they do it, what kind of technological basis they've got. The world is a college of corporations. And you cannot do without these sorts of things. International enterprises, all of them come from the Western world mostly, and the majority of the greatest and largest transnational corporations come from the United States and Europe. So these are sort of international organizations, and they make up the majority of the world gross domestic product. World GDP, gross domestic product, is over $75 trillion as of 2013-14, things such as these. So the figures for that sort of production basis actually tells that the international corporations of the United States and Europe make up the majority of the global GDP. It is more than half of the global GDP, which is made by these greatest and largest corporations. And the system is, of course, driven also. It is helped by things such as international system of currencies, of course. You cannot do without the international currencies such as the US dollar, the euro, the yen, the Japanese yen, and things like that. Transnational corporations started the history of the transnational corporations starts in the late in the 19th century, actually. The first international corporations started to appear actually in the 1860s. By the time when entrepreneurs such as Werner Siemens, who created the telegraph and telephone company, he set up this business in Germany, and he was behind the project of connecting Europe and America into one system. And that system of telegraph was really revolutionary. So that was one of the very first international corporations. Then, of course, there were automobile companies, the largest automobile companies such as Daimler-Benz, German companies, American companies. They produced cars, of course, and they distributed them across the globe. There were mergers and acquisitions. One of the very first multinational corporations also, and actually that was the basis behind these greatest international corporate system, and that was the oil industry. International oil industry became the source of international corporations, of the corporatocracy. Corporatocracy is a thing which is which encompasses businesses and the people who rule them or manage these sort of systems. Transnational corporations play a very important, crucial role in the global economy. Global economy is actually comprised of these sort of businesses, and these companies, the majority of them, and today we've got more than 84,000 international corporations. They, of course, play one of the most important roles in international business relations, and that sort of things. And they coordinate economic activities, and they coordinate their businesses and subsidiaries across the globe. They set up a whole chain of subsidiaries, actually, and some sort of companies, small enterprises. They do lots of mergers and acquisitions, of course, and they can be called monopolies as well, because the reason for their being really big corporations, they sometimes take up or make up whole markets in the global system. They are just monopolies in world markets, such as world oil market, natural gas market, and many others. So these are sort of the majority of the production resources is based actually on the international system of companies and corporations, and they do lots of things to maintain this system of international production. And objectively speaking, we cannot do without these corporations, and the reason for it, I believe, is that the world population increased so dramatically and tremendously in the 20th century that there is no other power in the world that could provide that many goods and services to the growing population. Because if we do without these international corporations, if we ban these monopolies, that would mean that the basis, the industrial basis of the economy in each and every state in the world is going to be provided by small and middle-sized enterprises. And these companies produce goods and services at very high prices. But in the world, we've got very poor people, and the majority, the middle class, of course, is the basis of each and every state in the world, but the middle class is a rare thing. Even in Russia, we do, of course, have the middle class, but still, this sort of people is a rare resource in the economy, and the majority of the population lives behind their means. They try to survive, of course, and if they someday come to understand that their income is not enough, their disposable income is not enough to provide for their families, they're going to die, and they're going to starve, and so this sort of thing tells us that only transnational corporations, by means of economies of scale, that's the greatest economic law in economic history. The economies of scale can only provide the majority of goods and services at competitive prices. And the world population, which, like we said, increases very quickly. It increases from year to year to year, and that sort of system is working really the system works pretty good. There are, of course, some economic and industrial problems in the international corporate business, but still, I think that only these companies can and may provide these sort of goods and services, and they provide competitiveness. And our goal, the goal of Russian companies, Russian government, is to take part in the transnationalization process, and we should we should really find some very effective policy tools in the Russian economy in order to maintain the growth of international enterprises. And we've got some sort of something like 3 dozen international enterprises which are included in the global Forbes list of 2,000 greatest companies in the world. 2,000 biggest companies in the world. Out of these 2,000 companies, 3 dozen are Russian companies. And this is the basis of our economy. Of course, in majority, they are resource-based companies, such as Gazprom, Rosneft, and other resource-based enterprises. Of course, there are some sort of banks, telecommunication systems, but the majority of Russian corporations are represented by resource-based structures, resource-based entities. International enterprises are also the greatest employers. They employ many people. Millions of people in the world are working for the transnational corporations. In Russia, we do a great deal of trying to work for those international companies, because they provide competitive salary, they provide opportunities for good education, they provide actually many things, career growth and many other things, because they are really creative companies. In Russia, we also got some creative companies, but they're still behind, way behind their international peers from the United States and Europe, and even China. The very specifics of these international corporations is that in their majority, Russian companies, resource-based companies, are state-owned enterprises, as well as Chinese companies. They're also, in majority, they're state-owned enterprises. That means they are under the direct control by the government. The Chinese government, the Russian government, unlike the United States companies and the European companies that are doing their business independently. They're mostly private companies with private shareholders, and these shareholders take part in the production process not sort of not like we usually understand it to be, so that some individual entrepreneurs, such as like it was in the 19th century and the early 20th century, Henry Ford, the greatest engineer, came and created his plant in Detroit and started manufacturing Fords. Well, that was another epoch. That was another era of industrialism. But it was so impressive, that epoch, that era, that Henry Ford is believed to be the founder, the inventor of the automobile, which is not true. In the United States, they believe that Henry Ford actually created the first automobile. This is not true. We know that the first automobile was created in Germany in 1887 by Daimler and Benz. These two engineers came together and they set up a company, Gasmotorenfabrik or something like that, and they created the first automobile, and later it was called Mercedes, but that was in the 1930s. Of course, if we compare these enterprises, the German enterprise with the American one, we'll see that the American enterprise is much larger. Actually, it was the largest production facility, the largest plant to produce automobiles. And Henry Ford, his facilities, his enterprise produced millions of cars each year. By the end of 1929, so just before the Great Depression, a car, just one car, was produced in 24 seconds. And it left the enterprise, it left the plant in 24 seconds. That was really impressive. And that was the result of the good management in these companies. But still, there are of course some rankings of transnational corporations, and Ford is among them still today. This company is still with us today. It changed dramatically, of course. Of Ford Corporation, we'll see that this company in the early 1900s, in 1920s, in the 1930s, these plants produced cars like whole entities at one place, and so that means there was no outsourcing. But today, Ford Corporation and many other enterprises such as these no longer hold such great facilities because it is really expensive to have all those plants and all those production facilities. You've got to pay for them. You've got to pay rents, you've got to pay taxes, which is not really effective. And economists and business industrialists have found some sort of managerial technologies, and they came up with an idea that it is really good and effective and efficient to just take that one sort of competence and give it over to another enterprise which is best in doing it, which can provide the best quality products at the best possible price. And this process was called outsourcing, and every company started doing that. company, especially computer companies, such as international business machines or industrial business machines. Yeah, IBM, for instance, industrial business machines, or Dell computer. They they take 100% resource base from other companies, their competences, and what they do is they only just provide. They are engineers. This is the sort of thing we know today. They are just engineers, and they provide engineering services to the world of corporations, and outsourcing companies became that sort of leaders in the business world, in the international and corporate environment. Looking at this table, we can say that the majority of the greatest companies in the world, and this is the 500 biggest corporations list, Fortune Global 500. So out of 500 biggest corporations in the world, the majority is taken by the United States. But we see that since 2004, the number of American companies in the list of 500 greatest companies in the world, Fortune Global 500, started to decrease. And by 2008, the number of American companies in this list came down from 176 to 140. This is a big drop, but it does not mean that these companies are dying. It means only that there's this specific thing which is called total revenue, and in order to make into this list, you've got to have a particular amount of, for countries it's GDP, but for corporations it's total revenue, or total profits and things such as these. And in order to make for this list, in order to make these sort of journals, Fortune Global 500, include in this list of companies, you've got to have over $22 billion worth of goods and services produced in 1 year. So, if you produce $21 billion worth of goods and services each year, it does not mean that you are a small international enterprise. You just do not make up for this sort of rating, and your company is left behind, but it does not mean that American companies are dying. Well, of course, we should note that among these 500 biggest corporations, there are lots of Chinese companies today, and China started its great leap forward way back in the early 2000s, and in those days they had only 16, if I'm not mistaken, 18 companies actually in 2004 out of the greatest, largest 500 Fortune Global companies. Today it is almost 80 companies, and by that indicator, China just made Japan. And Japan took the second place after the United States by the number of enterprises. But again, I'd like to tell you, and I'd like to assure you, that it is not really a problem for the international business. These companies still exist, they're not bankrupt companies. And if we create another list of companies, if we take other lists of companies such as Forbes Global 2000 companies, we will find that out of 2000 largest companies in the world, over 1,100, almost 1,200 companies come from the United States and Europe, from the G7 countries. That sort of thing. So, like I said, they are greatest enterprises in the world. Russia, as of 2011, had 7 companies, and like I said, they are in majority they are resource-based enterprises. Japan came up with 68 companies, China 73. So China took over from Japan the second place in the list by the number of companies, Fortune Global 500 index. What are the major characteristics of the international companies or multinationals? Of course, in order to be a multinational company, you've got to have subsidiaries across the world. You've got to sell products all over the world, and the more you sell goods and services to other countries, the more you are involved in the international division of labor, in the international system of production. And this international system of enterprises and production works the way it always worked, actually. The scheme of producing goods and services today is to find the cheapest resources, and they do it. They provide factors of production, and these factors of production, so they just take Chinese workforce, they take resources from Russia or Africa, the cheapest resources. You take some really good but not expensive technology, information technology from India. India is the largest manufacturer of software in the world. It is one of the greatest provider of that sort of things, information technologies and pharmaceuticals as well. 96% of world market is actually comprised of Indian software, and this is really impressive for these business, and of course pharmaceuticals as well. The majority of medicine, medical things, pharmaceuticals is produced in India. China is the leader in hardware. They are the leader in producing computers. In 2004, Chinese company Lenovo bought IBM subsidiary, which was responsible for producing PCs. But well, it does not mean that PCs are not going to be produced in the United States, or they did not want any computers in the United States to be produced by an American company. It does not mean that. It's just that in the United States, in order to produce a computer, a PC in the United States, you've got to pay really high wages or salary, big salaries to these Silicon Valley engineers and manufacturers, whereas in China, in order to produce just one PC in 2004, and before 2004, you had to invest only $1. So it took $1 to produce a PC in China in 2004, and at that sort of price, PCs were not really competitive to be produced in the United States. So they just sold that business to Chinese company Lenovo at the price of, I believe, $1.4 billion. For a company, this is not a really large amount of money. There are companies that were bought and sold and resold at much higher prices, actually tens of billions of dollars. But still, it is a remarkable event in the business world, because now Lenovo took the right to produce computers under the label of IBM and use some of their technologies, and they did a great deal in producing and understanding the workings of these sort of technologies. International businesses created global value chains, of course, and those chains are in existence until this day. They are the largest providers of capital. When we speak about international corporations, we usually mean not only the corporations themselves and all their household names, we also mean international investment behind them. This is the international investment or foreign direct investment which makes these international business system work. They are the largest providers of capital. They invest funds into subsidiaries across the globe. They invest large amounts of money into production facilities, in paying taxes. They are paying taxes. They provide internet access, and they provide everything. And these sort of investments make up the whole system of the international movement of capital. Capital as a factor of production